Let's move on from the serious stuff. Let's talk LSU. Are you ready to talk the LSU Tigers?
Of course I am, right? One of the most, in my opinion, dysfunctional yet highly successful universities in the country.
That is exactly how I want to steamroll into this segment. So, LSU has been interesting this year. We covered them when they were in the national championship for women's college basketball. Now, they won, remember? And we talked about that controversy with Caitlin Clark in Iowa and all that good stuff. Well, they had themselves a weekend by the men's baseball team winning the College World Series. Note who won that because it will come up again later. And obviously, that's a great feat. They played Florida, who Florida had looked good coming in, and the bats just came on fire, which lends itself to what you said is that in baseball specifically, sometimes the bats just get hot and you can't stop a team. So those are two great things. They win the national championship in two sports. Well, this past week, a name that I hadn't heard in a while came up, Les Miles. And I'm sure when he was in his heyday, the Mad Hatter was your kind of coach.
I've never been like a big Les Miles fan, man. I really
Really?
haven't. Yeah, I always found him just kind of strange, the chewing on the grass and stuff like that. It's just weird, man. Like he's kind of seemed like he's intense at sometimes, and other times he kind of seemed like this all shucks sort of guy. I think I don't know. Not never. I've never been a big LSU fan, and so maybe that's a big part of it. But yeah, never cared a whole lot for Les Miles.
No, I think I know what it is. I think that you cannot live in a world in which two Mike Leaches exist because that basically is the kind of stuff that Mike Leach used to do.
I don't even think these guys are in the same stratosphere. Mike Leach, he is on his own pedestal, and always will be.
But that's the key. That's the key, though, is that he's on his own pedestal. So when somebody comes along who shows some of the behaviors, the eccentric behaviors of a guy like Mike Leach, it somehow triggers you because you're like, no, 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 this I will not stand for. And they're coaching in university that I just already can't stand. So it's like two things happening. And we should say, rest in peace, Mike Leach,
Of course.
because the man no longer with us. So he is on a pedestal for this show forever. But Les Miles had an interesting week also because LSU got in trouble for some things that happened back in 2012 to 2015. He was famously the coach for them, I think, gosh, maybe like 2008 to 2016. I don't remember. It was a long enough tenure in which he was there and made an impact. And he had to vacate 37 wins recently because of some things that happened back in 2012 and 2015. There's multiple things I want to bring up about this because it makes him ineligible for the College Football Hall of Fame. So that'll make you happy because you have to have at least 100 wins and or have coached 100 games and have a winning percentage of 600. And because he vacated 37 wins, he now has less than a 600 winning percentage. But all of this stuff with vacating wins, I've never quite understood it by the NCAA. It's never made a lot of sense to me. And I understand that you have to bring down punishment when people break the rules. And you're a steadfast believer in that. You've said that about gambling, right? If you break the rules, the punishment should be swift and severe. But in this case, vacating wins, like we all saw that stuff happen. Just because a record book says it didn't happen doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I never quite understood that. I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, gambling opens the door too much for someone doing something on the field to change the outcome of a game, in their favor. This stuff, I don't know if this is the NCAA's attempt to like remind the rest of us that they still do exist. I think they're one of the most poorly run organizations in sports. At this point, if you want to dig deep enough anywhere at any of these major universities, you're gonna find stuff like this. You're gonna find people getting paid or whatever else, getting cars, getting whatever, I don't know, promises, parents getting jobs, the Reggie Bush stuff that went down. Like, it's stupid. Reggie Bush should have the Heisman. Like, it's
I
the
agree.
dumbest thing ever. I think this is so stupid. The Fab Five, like, vacating the championship or whatever, the final it's stupid. I mean, and hey, I don't those guys, I'm not a fan of the way those guys went about what they did, but, like, they were great. They were great at what they did. They were great on the basketball floor, and that's what earns these accolades, not whatever happens off the floor. So this is one of those cases where, yes, I understand what the rules are, but to go back, 10 years, especially when it was happening in an era where it was happening everywhere, it was like the Wild West, right? Yeah, sure, NIL's made things crazy, but at least it's all on the table now. And back then, it was all happening. It's just people pretended it didn't. Just everybody flying their flag of amateurism, right? It's just such a waste of time and resources. It's absolutely absurd. And I really think it's only a matter of time before, especially in relation to college football, before the NCAA basically becomes obsolete and
Oh,
irrelevant.
that's around the corner. And you and I talked about that the very first time we recorded. We talked about this, or at least we alluded to it, that the NCAA needed to stay relevant. But when I think about this, I think about going back 10 years, and it reminds me of when people go back in somebody's social media feed to find something weird that they said from 10 years ago and you don't put any contents. Look, the reason that these wins are being vacated on the football side is because there was one guy who was ineligible. They knew he was ineligible and they didn't report it until 2018. So I get it. And he was taking payments and there was a lot of other things happening. I understand that under the veil of amateurism, which is something that, as you pointed out, they fly like a flag as if it actually means something when we all know it doesn't. And they're making it more and more known every day that it doesn't matter with NIL and the transfer portal. It's becoming more and more like a pro league. It's an asinine to me to go back and vacate something that is so far in the past now. And who does it hurt? You know what I mean? Like at this point, what is it hurting to have it stand that way? Because we all saw Les Mile play those games or his team play those games, and those kids earned that. So now, because one thing happened in which they didn't have any control over, now they lose out. They lose out of these things. And that part of it really bothers me because in football specifically, they're taking such a risk being out there. The sport is violent. And the universities at that time didn't give them anything. And you can come at me and tell me that they get an education, whatever, right? We all know that it doesn't work the same way as it does for other people who go to school on scholarship. It's not the same. The universities see them as a means to an end, and they have. I don't care what these coaches say. I don't care how much they say they care about them. The university, as a general concept, sees those players as a cash cow. You cannot tell me that's different. And so now what we're doing is we're just going to find ways in which the NCAA can pull down the iron fist and say, look at us. We still have power. And you know what? That time is fleeting because they're not going to have a goddamn thing to do when this becomes a semi pro league. They're just not.
No, it's ridiculous. And what I want to know, right? So he is did so can he not make the Hall of Fame? I saw the story, I just don't recall the details. Is Les Miles not qualified for the Hall of Fame because he is now below what they consider to be like the win total
It's not the win total. I think you have
or the winning
had to have
percentage?
it. I think you have had to have coached 100 games total and have a winning percentage of 600 or better. And because of these vacated wins now, his winning percentage dropped to like 560 or something.
So when they vacate these wins, do they give these wins to their opponents?
From what I read today, and again, forgive me if I read this wrong, it's happened before on the show, but apparently in the record books, LSU was winless in those seasons.
But I mean, so if they're winless, does that mean that the teams does it just go to does it just basically vanish from existence, or does the
Yes.
opponent get the win? Okay, so say, what if you were some guy, right, that was coaching some team that LSU played against, and you had coached, you had met basically all the other criteria to be a potentially Hall of Fame coach, but you were missing the winning percentage or whatever by one game, right? And now here you are, 10 years later, you get that game, and
I love I love you calling the league offices trying to get your
right.
wins. Look, man,
Hey, hey,
I
man,
lost to Les Miles 4 times. Can I get that? Because I'll be eligible.
I'll
I
be
don't make
in.
it, but I'll be in, right?
I'll be in.
Hey, again, I understand that rules exist, but that part of it too is kind of silly because you talked to Reggie Bush, and Reggie Bush earned that Heisman. You're not going to tell me any different, right? I saw him carve up those defenses. I saw him carve up Virginia Tech in the opening game of the season that year. It was a bludgeoning. We couldn't stop him. He had like 3 or 4 touchdowns. He was legit. He was the real deal that year. And just because his mom got a job or got a car, it didn't change anything that he did on the football field. And people will say he shouldn't have been out there. Whatever. He earned it. He earned it physically out there on that field. He made the sacrifices. And Vince Young was like, I don't want the Heisman because they tried to give it to him. They tried to give Vince Young the Heisman after the fact. And it's like, no, he won that Heisman.
Yeah.
So many things about this are absurd. As much as I hate LSU, Yeah, that's right. I said it. As much as I hate LSU, this is unfair.
You could probably convince me to at least be accepting of the idea that the team wins or whatever should be vacated because you could say they were unfairly recruited or what I could see where you could connect the dots and you could probably get me to at least acknowledge that it's a reasonable punishment. But the individual awards don't make sense at all because Reggie Bush was going to be a Heisman caliber football player no matter where he played, right? So the fact that he got recruited to USC with gifts and promises and cash and everything else is irrelevant to what he actually did on the field. It did not give him a competitive advantage on the field. Now, if his offensive line was playing with like brass knuckles on or something, then yeah, you could argue that they had a competitive advantage and vacate the wins and everything else, right? But
So
like
absurd.
I know, but that's it's just as absurd as what they're doing, right? Basically insinuating that by him getting these gifts or whatever, that he needs to be punished by not being officially acknowledged as the best player in college football that year, as if that had anything to do with what happened on the field, and it did not. Not one bit, man, not one bit.